We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph and Meseches Beitzah. This is Beitzah Daf 40a. The Mishnah continues, Misha Zimein Etzlo Orchim. Let's say somebody invites over guests for the Yontiv, Lo Yolichu Biyadam Manos. They shouldn't take with them portions of food when they leave the meal. Elim Kain Zacha Lahem Manosei Meir of Yontiv. Unless they were Zocha, he was Mezakeh to them, he gave it to them from before Yontiv. Rashi over here explains, Misha Zimein Etzlo Orchim Meir Acheres. These guests come from a different city. V'yavo Etzlo Al Yedei Eruv. They come to him through an Eruv. So Lo Yolichu La'achar Su'udam Manos Biyadam Leveisam Lo Su'udas Halayla. They shouldn't bring portions of the food to their house for the evening meal. In other words, after the meal, they take some food with them. They shouldn't do that. Ela imkein zacha lahem al yedei acher, unless he is mezaket to them through someone else. Manoseim erev yontiv, that they own these portions from before yontiv. Shemisarim balabayis ze lo adam acher b'meshich. What the person does is the balabayis gives them to a different person, and that person makes a kinyan. V'amar lo zakei b'manas halalu leploni. He says you should make that kinyan on behalf of ploni. Leploni v'leploni. Dezachin lo l'adam shelo b'fanav. You're allowed to be mezaket to somebody even when the person is not there. So in other words, the balabayis gives it to another person, and that person acts as a shliach and makes a kinyan on their behalf. Then it becomes theirs from before yontiv. V'hayu shalahem ba'od yom. Now it's theirs from before yontiv. Leilech karagleim. So now it follows their tchum, and they can bring it back to their houses after the meal. And the Gemara says, Itmar, it was learned, hamafkid peiros eitzel chaveiro. Let's say somebody deposits fruits by his friend. Rav Omar keragle mishe hefkidu lo. Rav says it follows the tchum of the person who's watching the peiros, the person who it was deposited to. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says keragle hamafkid. It goes by the owner, meaning it goes by the person who's making the deposit, who's giving over the fruits. The fruits follow his tchum. And so the Gemara says, Leima Rav Shmuel da'azdu l'tamayu. Let's say that Rav and Shmuel, they follow their reasoning that we find in a Mishnah in Bava Kama. The Tanan we learned in the Mishnah, Im hichnis birashus bal hachotzer chayev. It says that if the person brought it in birashus, then the bal hachotzer is chayev. We'll see Rashi in a moment. And Rebbe says, Lio lameino chayev ad sheikab b'lolav balabayis lishmor. Rebbe says, you're not chayev until the balabayis takes it upon himself to watch over it. And Rashi over here explains, Im hichnis birashus shoro k'teirosov peirosov l'chotzer chaveru. Let's say a person takes his ox, takes his pots, takes his fruits, and he brings it into the chotzer of his friend with rishus. So Baal Chotzer Chayev ben Izakin. So the owner of the chotzer, he's the one that's chayev in any damages. V'reisha da'ach masnisin b'Baba Kama t'chiyamar le ol ve'enter ka'amar le. The beginning of this Mishnah is in Baba Kama. The idea is when the person says come and gives him permission to come into his chotzer, he's saying come into the chotzer and I'm going to watch. So in other words, according to the Tanna Kama is saying the Baal Chotzer is chayev automatically by giving permission, and Rebbe is saying that's not the case. Rebbe is saying that the Balabayis, the person who's taking it into the chotzer giving permission, has to explicitly say that he's taking on the obligation to watch over the property. Otherwise, he's not chayev in the damages. And the Gemara continues, V'yomer Rav Huna Amar Rav, and Rav Huna says in the name of Rav, Halacha k'divrei Chachamim, the halacha is like the Chachamim, again, that even if the Baal HaChotzer does not explicitly take on the obligation to watch over the property, he's chayev in any damage that happens to it. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Halacha k'Rebbe, the halacha is like Rebbe, that again, the Baal HaChotzer needs to explicitly say he's taking on the obligation to watch over the property. So the Gemara says, Leimo Rav da Amar k'Rabbanon, Ushmuel da Amar k'Rebbe. Let us say that Rav follows the Rabbanon, and let's say that Shmuel follows Rebbe. Rashi over here explains, Leimo hach plugsa dahacha. Let's say this machlokas over here. The machlokas again, Rav says we follow the tchum of the person who's watching over the peiros, and Shmuel says we follow the tchum of the person who deposited the peiros. Let's say that machlokas kihachos. It's the same over here. Mishum da Amar Rav halacha k'Rabbanon, because Rav says the halacha is like the Rabbanon, Tekaimi b'Reshusei l'Inyan Shmir, that automatically it's in his Reshus and he has to watch over it. Hu adin l'tchumin. So the same is true by tchum. In other words, again, the person watching over it, it's going to follow his tchum. And so the Gemara says, not necessarily. Amar lach Rav, Rav will say to you, Anod da Amri afilu l'Rebbe. I can go even according to Rebbe. In other words, even according to Rebbe, who says you have to explicitly take upon yourself the obligation to watch, even Rav can follow that. Ad kan lo kama Rebbe hasam ela debistam lo kavel lanetirusa. All Rebbe was saying over there was that min hastam, if you don't say anything, then you're not automatically chayiv to watch over it. Aval hacha, but over here, he certainly accepted upon himself to watch over it. That's the case. case, once he accepts to watch over it, so then it follows his Tchum. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Ano de Amri afilu the Rabbanon, I can even follow the Rabbanon. Adkan lo ka'amri Rabbanon hasam ela denichole leinish denekum torei bereshusei de bal chotzer. The Rabbanon only said it over there because the person wants his ox to be in the reshus of the bal chotzer. The mazik leilo mechayev, that if he damages it, he's not going to be chayev. Aval hacha, but over here, minichole leinish deleikum peirei bereshusei de chavre. Does the person want his fruit to go into the other person's reshus? In other words, there's no benefit for the tchum to follow the other person. So in the case of the Rabbanon, so it makes sense that the person would say, I want it to be in the reshus of the bal chotzer, because the idea is I want the bal chotzer to be responsible for any damage. But over here, that doesn't make sense, and therefore it should continue to have the tchum of the mafkid, of the person who deposited the peiros. The Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Vim irevu peiros of kamo. The Mishnah's case was exactly the same case as the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. The case was that a person's fruits are deposited by somebody else, and it says that if the owner of the fruits makes an eruv, his fruits follow his own tchum. Now, if you say like the opinion that it always follows the person who it's deposited by that person, by the person watching it, ki irev whom I have, who cares if the owner makes an eruv? It should still follow the shomer's tchum. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Amri Bei Rav. They said in the yeshiva of Rav, Kigon sheyichad lo karen zavis. The case in the Mishnah is, not only is it deposited by the particular person, by the shomer, but also the shomer is actually designating an area in his property that's owned, so to speak, by the owner of the fruit. So it's really in the owner of the fruit's reshus, and that's why it follows the owner of the fruit's tchum. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here, a proof from the next line in the Mishnah, Misha Zimin etzlo orchim, let's say somebody invites guests over, Lo yolichu biyadam manos, they shouldn't take with them portions of food, Elim kein zacha lohem manoseyam erev yontav, unless they were zocha in the fruit, he was mezaket to them from erev yontav. So again, it's the exact same case. These guests are the owner of the food, but it's being watched, it's deposited by the person who's inviting over the guests, by the host. V'yamrid karagle mishefkidu etzlo, if you're going to say that it always follows the tchum of the person whose reshus the fruits are in. So who cares if he's mezaket to them? Who cares if they're the owners? He's watching over it, and it should follow his tchum. And so the Gemara answers, no, hachinami, here also you give the same answer. Kevan shezochol lehem al yedei acher, since he was mizaket to them through somebody else, kemisha yichid lo karen zavis dami. It's the same as a case of yichid lo karen zavis. In other words, again, the area in his property where the fruits are, it's as if that area as well belongs to them. So it's really like it's in their reshus all along, so it follows their tchum. The Gemara says, same. If you want, I could say another answer. Zocha shani, when the person actively is mezaket to them, in that case it's different and it follows their tchum. We'll take a look at Rashi over here. Sheyichid lo karen zavis, he designates a corner that belongs to the owner of the fruits. The ushle base, in other words, the point is the shomer lends out his house, so to speak. Hilgach b'reshus hamafkid, therefore, in such a situation, it would be considered in the reshus of the mafkid, in the reshus of the one who deposited it, the owner. Aval hacha, but over here, demashchan shomer, meaning in a standard case where it's not yichin lo karen zavis, it's just a case where the shomer pulls it into his property. But v'kibel olav shmirasan, and just accepts to watch over it, harehin karaglav, then it would follow the tchum of the shomer. The Gemara continues, Rav Chana bar Chaniloi tola bisra beivra dedasher. Rav Chana bar Chaniloi, he was going over to a host to eat, and he hung some of his meat on the bar of the door. The intention was that he was going to take it home to his house. He had made an eruv techumen. So Asal Akami de Rav Huna, he came in front of Rav Huna. Amar Lei said to him, Iyad tolis zil shakil. If you're the one that hung the meat, then you're allowed to take it to your house. V'inu talulach, but if they hung it there on your behalf, lo sishkol, then you're not allowed to take it to your house. Rashi over here says, Tala bisra be'ivra dedasha bebeis ush bezichne. Again, he hung it on the bar of the door of the house of his host. Shenasnu lo tavache yom mibod yom. The case is that the butchers of the city, they gave him the meat from before Yontiv. V'huaya benir acheres shamarvin lo lavolakan. And again, he lived in a different city. He had made an eruv techumen, so he owned this meat from before Yontiv. The question was, could he take it home? So Achi Garcina Amar Leim Atolis Zil Shakel V'inu Talulach. Again, if you hung it, you could take it. If not, you can't. Letzarchach, if they hung it for you, Lo Sishko Laholichon Le'irach. Don't take it to your city. Ulakame Meforesh Time of Azal. The Gemara is going to explain the reason as we go on. So in other words, again, Rav Huna said, if you hung it, it's fine. You could take it home. Otherwise, you cannot take it home. And so the Gemara continues, V'iyu tala mishakil. But 1 second, is it really true that if he hung it, he could take it home? V'Rav Huna Talmud de Rav Have, but Rav Huna was a student of Rav. V'Yomar Rav kiragle mishif kidu etzel, and Rav is the one that says that it goes by the person who it's in his reshus, that it's deposited by. So in other words, in this case, Rav Chana bar Chaniloi, he owned the meat, but it was deposited by his host's house. So therefore, it should follow the tchum of the host. So the Gemara answers, Shani Ivra the Dasha, it's different by the case where it's hanging on the bar of a door. Because in that case, it's like they gave Rav Chana bar Chaniloi that area of the house. He was the owner, so to speak, of that area. It was in his reshus all along, and therefore that's not an issue. It can certainly follow his own tchum. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Hillel Rav Ashi, but Rav Hillel says to Rav Ashi, V'inu talu le, but what about the other way around? Let's say they hung it for him, lo shakel, now he's not allowed to take it. V'amar Shmuel, but Shmuel says, Shor shel patam, if you have an ox that's being fattened, it's meant to be sold, anyone can purchase it. Hareu karagle kol adam, it follows the feet of everybody, it gets the tchum of everybody. Rashi over here says, Amar le Rav Hillel Rav Ashi, V'inu talu le lo shakel, if they hung it for him, he can't take it. V'amar Shmuel, Shor shel patam, hareu karagle kol adam. Al mokevan du ukmei b'machshavto, b'reshus kol mi sheyikneyu. So that case was basically saying, if the person is intending on selling it, he's basically having in mind that anyone who buys it, it should be in his reshus, he should be like the owner. Mutar hakona lo lichul l'makomo, and the person who buys it can take it to his place, it will follow his tchum. V'hachanam, here also, habirashusei ukmei b'machshavto, b'reshus kol mi sheyikachenu. Over here, if they're hanging it for him, they're having in mind that it should be his. So why shouldn't it follow his tchum? Who cares whether he hangs it or they hang it? In either case, they're having him in mind, it should follow his tchum. And the Gemara continues, asking along the same lines. Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashi. Ravina said to Rav Ashi, V'inu talu le, if they hung it for him, lo shakel, he can't take it, it doesn't follow his tchum. V'yamar Rabba bar bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabba bar bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, halacha Rabbi Dosa, the halacha is like Rabbi Dosa. And Rashi over here says, D'yamar hareu keragle haro, Rabbi Dosa says that it always follows the feet of the shepherd. If there's only one shepherd in town, we assume it goes to him. Al makevan de'in roa be'ir elahu. The halacha basically is if there's only one shepherd in the city, and we are witnesses, we know that anybody who owns an animal is thinking it should follow the tchum of that one shepherd. Amrinon basrei azla, we say that it follows that shepherd. Certainly over here, again, if they're hanging it on the bar of the door for this individual, for Rav bar Chaniloi, so it should be in his reshus. They put it there for him, it should follow his reshus. So again, it shouldn't matter if they're the ones that put it there for him. Amar le Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana, and the Gemara continues along the same lines. Rav Ashi says to Rav Kahana, V'inu talu le, if they hung it for him, lo shakel, he doesn't take it, he can't follow his tchum. V'atanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, ha-behema v'ha-kelim karagli ha-bailam. Again, animals and vessels, they follow the feet of their owners. And Rashi over here says, karagli ha-bailam, v'chevan de litzorcho talu hasham. If they hung it there for him, havale iyu bailam, he is the owner. So of course, again, it shouldn't make a difference whether he puts it there, whether they put it there, the halacha should be the same. It should follow his tchum. And so the Gemara answers, Elashani Rav Chana bar Chaniloi. Rather, Rav Chana bar Chaniloi is different. The whole situation has nothing to do with the regular halachas of tchum. Rather, the Gavra Rabba, he was a great individual. V'tarid b'shmaitein, he was somebody who was always learning, he wasn't paying attention. There's an issue if you have a piece of meat that you're not paying attention to, that you lose track of, so you're not allowed to eat it because we're afraid maybe it's not the same piece of meat. And so again, Rav Chana bar Chaniloi, he was somebody who was always learning. And here's what Rav Huna was telling Rav Chana bar Chaniloi. If you're the one who hung it on the bar of the door, then that means you have a real siman there. Your mind has never left, has never strayed from paying attention. You can identify this piece of meat clearly. So zil shakol, then you can take the piece of meat. But if they hung it for you, that means there's a hesach hadas. You haven't been paying attention, and you shouldn't take the piece of meat. And Rashi over here says, Elashana Rav Chana bar Chaniloi, but time alamisham tchum, and it has nothing to do with tchum. Ela Rav Huna de'ori lehachi, when Rav Huna gave him this halacha, this psak, Talmidei de Rav have, he's a student of Rav, meaning Rav Huna is a student of Rav. For Rav Amar b'shchitas chulin basar kevan shenesalam minu eye, and also Rav happens to hold that if you have meat that became hidden from the eye, it's asur. V'afilo tole biyasir b'bayis Yisrael, even if it's hanging in the house of a Jew. For Rav Chana agav tirda deshmaite mishchach shar asakav, again Rav Chana, because he was learning, he would forget forget his other business. V'achi kamer le Rav Huna, and Rav Huna was saying to him, Tolis midi David inish biyadei lo minshi v'lo masach daite. If you're the one that did it, so you did it with your own hands, you're not going to forget. You're going to be paying attention. V'yinu talulach, but if they hung it for you, ataloy adaitach lekach, that means you weren't thinking this. V'heim einon zehirim b'shalach, they're not going to be careful with your property. V'yaschut atayu v'lo sishul, they also are not paying attention, and you should not take it. And Rashi continues, Lashon achra mishum muksa. Another way of understanding this last answer of the Gemara is it's all an issue of muksa. In other words, if he hung it, that means he had in mind for this piece of meat. It's not muksa. If they hung it for him, then it is an issue of muksa. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ein mashkin v'shochtin es hamidbarius. You're not allowed to water, and you're not allowed to slaughter animals that live out of the city, that live in the wilderness. Avol mashkin v'shochtin es habaisos. But when it comes to the domesticated animals, those you're allowed to water, and those you're allowed to slaughter. Elohein baisos, the following are considered domesticated animals. Halonos be'ir, it's the ones that sleep overnight in the city itself. Midbarius, and the ones that are considered the wild animals. Halonos be'efer, those are the ones that sleep out in the pasture outside of the city. Those again you don't have in mind for, so it's a problem of muksa. And the Gemara says, Lomali l'meimar mashkin v'shochtin. Why does the Mishnah have to say that you can water the animal and you slaughter the animal? Simple explanation of the question is that the issue should only be shchita. If the Mishnah is an issue of muksa, so the issue is, are you allowed to shech the animal or not? But watering, giving water to the animal, that has nothing to do with the issue of muksa. And so the Gemara answers, Milsa agav urche kamash malon. The Mishnah is teaching us something along the way. Delishki inish behemto, that first a person should give his animal water, v'hadar lishchot, and then the person should shech the animal. In other words, the watering we're talking about over here is part of the shechita process. Mishum sircha de mishkan. The reason why you should do this is it's easier to strip the hide of the animal after it is well fed. Rashi over here says, Milsa agav urche detana dehavale leuruye bebehemos mimuteres umiasura. It should have simply said by the animals which is mutter, which is aser. Nakar urche belishna demashma minam milsa charati b'derech eretz. But we put in this word mashkin. It teaches us something in the way of the world of how a person should do a shechita properly. Mishum sircha de mishcha shetei nocha lafshita. In other words, again, it'll be easier to strip the hide of the animal. Shu nidbak yoser midai b'basar. Because again, if you don't do this, it's gonna cling to the flesh of the animal a little too much. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Elohein midbarius ve'elohein baisus. This is how you identify what's midbarius, and this is how you identify the baisus. Again, the domesticated animal, the wild animals, and the domesticated animals. Midbarios, what are wild animals? Kol sheyotzos bepesach. Those are the animals, they go out at Pesach time. V'roos ba'afar, and they graze out in the pasture. V'nichnasos b'revia rishona, and then when the first rain comes, that's when they come into the area, to the settled area. Revia Rishona refers to the first rains that happen in Mar Cheshvan. The Elohein Baisos, and the following are considered the domesticated animals. Kol sheyotzos v'roos chutz l'tchum. These are the animals, they go and they graze outside of the boundary of the city. Ubos v'linos b'soch hatchum, and when they come to stay overnight, they come within the tchum. In other words, the wild animals, they go out Pesach time, and they only come in about Mar Cheshvan time, whereas the Baisos, the domesticated animals, they come and they sleep within the tchum every single night. Rebbe says, Elu ve'elu baisos, saying both examples that you just gave, those are considered the domesticated animals. Ela elohein midbarios. Rather, what are considered wild animals? Kol sheyotzos v'ros ba'afar. It's only situations where they go and they graze in the pasture. Ve'ein nechnasos liyishav, and they never come into the settled areas. Lo b'yamos hachama v'lo b'yamos hageshamim. Not during the time of the summertime, not during the rainy season. In other words, according to the Tanakam, if they come in during the rainy season only, so that's still considered a wild animal. Rabbi says no. If they come in during the rainy season, so then that's considered also domesticated. It's only considered a wild animal if it doesn't come into the settled areas at all. And so the Gemara continues, Umiyislei l'Rebbe muksa, but does Rebbe even hold of this concept of muksa? The mashmos over here is that Rebbe is saying you have the domesticated animals, you have the wild animals, as if the wild animals are considered muksa. Does Rebbe even hold of muksa? V'aboy minei Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe mi Rebbe. But Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe asked Rebbe the following question. Patzile tomorrow, if you have these dates that are unripened, l'Rebbe Shimon mahu, what's the halacha according to Rabbi Shimon? Amar le ein muksa l'Rebbe Shimon, and he said back to him, Rabbi Shimon only holds of muksa as follows. We'll take a look at Rashi over here. Patzile tamarim shein misbashlos be'ilan liolam. It's referring to dates that never ripen on the tree. V'godrino san me'ilan va'osan len chosalos hein klikapos tamarim v'chonseno san l'sochon misbashlos. So what you do is you take them off of the tree, you put them into a certain kind of vessel, and then they ripen in the vessel. So ma'olechol mehen b'yomtiv. So he asked him, what's the halacha according to Rabbi Shimon? Can you eat from those on Yontiv? Again, that's Rabbi Shimon, who generally does not hold of muksa. So the question was, are these patzile tamara considered muksa? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amud Beis.